So I formally welcome you all to this session for Indian Economic Development Part 2, which is the 6th semester course for Econ. And the reading that we are going to do today is on the working paper, the IMF working paper, which again talks about Make in India. So this entire thing we have already covered. I've sent you two readings and then two different papers where to study this from. One source was the economic survey, this year's economic survey. The other source was the previous reading, which also talked about Make in India, what kinds of products to make in India. So we have already covered quite a few things in detail. This reading goes a little technical now. So this is perhaps the most technical reading that you're going to do in this course. That's why we need to spend a little bit more time on it as compared to any other reading. This is perhaps also the longest reading that you have. It's a 33-page voluminous reading with a lot of technical jargons and a lot of technical terms being discussed. So let's start our discussion there. So what this reading also starts by saying is that it is not just when we talk about structural transformation. So we have heard quite a bit about structural transformation. Now, when we talk about structural transformation, we talk about an economy being the transition of an economy from being an agrarian economy, the IMF working paper. So when you talk about structural transformation, now there are a lot of structural transformation models that you might have also covered. One of the most famous model is the Lewis model, which is also a structural model, structural change model. Then you have a Harris to Darrow model in development economics. So structural transformation essentially talks about that how an economy moves from an agrarian economy to industrial to service. We have discussed this ample number of. Now this reading goes a layer deeper into this, that how to achieve this industrial economy status, and it talks about how the Make in India program can be leveraged to enhance our production of manufacturing. And what it requires is not just about exports, because there is a lot of there's a lot of noise about that India needs to become an exporting economy. Even the survey says that India needs to become an exporting economy. So there has been a lot of call regarding increasing your exports, increasing exports of manufacturing goods. And then there has been a lot of debate about what we've already studied about network product. We'll go into the technical side. We'll not use the word network products. We will use different kind of economic analysis to understand what are the kind of products that India needs to get into. Eventually, we will come down to the same point that we need to specialize in network products. But the route taken by this particular working paper of IMF is a little different. It's more technical in the sense that it adds a lot of complex layers to its analysis, and we need to unravel those layers to understand that how does it actually come about to say, which is something similar to what the economic service also says about by indulging ourselves into the production of network products. So when we start this, it talks about that not only the structural transformation not only matters on the amount of exports. Of course, exports do matter, but what also matters is that what they export. So what essentially they export is the kind of commodity. As you can probably take a hint that eventually we are going to talk about certain network product, although the reading doesn't use this word anywhere. And whom to trade with. As we have already understood in the previous reading, that India's share of the rich economies, of the rich economies, of the emerging economies has actually reduced as compared to the middle income group, and the lower income group countries have increased. So this paper takes a similar conclusion. The conclusion might be similar to what we have already studied, but the route taken to conclude that is a little different. That's where this reading is technical, and this reading is very different. And eventually, when you're going to answer a particular question in your final examination, you can cross use both these readings. So you can use the concept of network products, but you can also use the arguments which are given in the working paper. Now let us see that what all concepts have been introduced. This reading is going to talk about the technological content in the exports. It is going to talk about the quality of exports, the sophistication, the complexity. Now, all of these jargons might look quite synonymous to you, but the reading goes in depth of explaining each of them in a very different manner. So, and then after it talks about that, what India's current exports and what India's history of exports has been. It talks about where is the potential, and then it further talks about what India needs to do. So every reading that we have done is in a similar manner, that it is going to talk about past the past experience that we have had, both in terms of manufacturing goods and in terms of service sector. The analysis will be somewhere between 1990 to somewhere around 2013. This will be the range of the temporal range of analysis. Then it will go on to where does the potential lie. This potential will be analyzed through a number of technical ways. We will go through what are the technical ways in which it talks about the potential that the Indian economy has, and then it talks about the way forward. And the way forward is very similar to everything else. So there is nothing new in way forward. I have discussed what needs to be done in the Indian economy ample number of times. So essentially, it's again quoting jargons after jargons. So that the way forward part is very simplistic, in the sense that since we've discussed it, we will just ponder over it. But the most technical part is to analyze this potential. We'll see about that as well. Now let's see the introduction and the motivation behind the entire reading. So if we see that the total exports, India has of course, after the liberalization phase, India has integrated itself with the world economy, which is also visible by the fact that the total exports as a percentage of GDP has increased from somewhere around 10% to 25%. So 25%, this is 2013 figure. So 25% of your GDP is actually coming from the export. And we've also done in the previous reading that India's share in global world exports increased from somewhere around 0.6% to somewhere around 1.8, 1.7%. These are figures that you already know. There's another figure that you can add to it, that India's share in terms of world service exports is somewhere around 3%. So these are statistics. The reason that I emphasize a lot on statistical analysis is because of the fact that without statistics you cannot quantify your answer. So these are some basic rudimentary figures that you need to remember, especially the trade as a percentage of world exports, and as a percentage of GDP. These two figures you need to remember. Now, as we have already discussed, that this reading is going to talk about that structural transformation depends on the what the kind of goods and services that you're producing, and who do you trade with. So it depends on the diversification of your exports across destinations, across products, across services. It talks about the composition of your export basket in terms of technological content, quality, sophistication, complexity. These are all jargons that we are going to discuss, and how closely are the goods that you are producing to the globally traded products, which essentially is perhaps coming close to the concept of network products, which we have already understood. Now, just to break the ice, that what diversification is. When we will talk about diversification, diversification will mean both geographic diversification and product-wise diversification. The reason that diversification is extremely important is that when you are a diversified economy in terms of your export market, both in terms of your products and in terms of your in terms of the countries that you're exporting to, then your exports are kind of not unstable. So if suppose there is a kind of setback to developing world, to the developed world, you still have sufficient amount of exports to the developing world. So it talks about broadening the market both in terms of geography as well as the products. We're going to analyze this further as well. The composition of export basket. The composition of when we will talk about the composition of export basket, we will talk about that the goods and services depends, I mean, how much your growth will be, or not only depends on what you export, but the kind of sophistication and productivity that you have in your export basket. The more sophisticated products that you will have. Now we will describe what sophistication are, but just for your understanding, it's that a technological breakthrough product, a product which requires a niche kind of work, labor or capital. So some kind of ubiquity. We'll talk about ubiquity as a word. So some kind of uniqueness that you can provide in your commodity. So the more kind of unique and sophisticated products you can contribute in your export basket, the faster will be your growth. And not only will you need to include new commodities, you also need to constantly improve on your existing commodities. So in a sense, this will talk about that export basket is actually linked to economic growth, but that not only depends on the existing exports that you have. In the existing exports, you need to increase the quality. Then you need to break through into new areas. You need to break into new products. The new products should be sophisticated ones, should be ones which are embedded with higher technology. Sophisticated products with higher technology. But the ability to produce new products also depends on what are similar kind of products that you are producing, the similarity of products. So we will talk about something called a product space. We'll talk about something called a product space, and we'll see that what are similar products. So essentially what this reading is going to tell you about composition, in terms of composition of export basket, that you need to constantly improve. Not only in terms of your existing exports. In your existing exports, you need to improve the quality. You need to diversify into new products. Those new products should be those which are globally well traded, which are actually traded by rich countries. As you can imagine that if you're exporting products to, if you're making products which are actually needed by rich countries, you will get a higher income from that, and thereby the more will be your development. But the ability to produce those new products will depend on the kind of architecture, economic architecture that is existing in your economy. So let me give you an example for this. That suppose you are making phones. So if you're making phones, then perhaps you can also get into new product which is a television, LCDs or LEDs or plasma TVs or something of a similar technological kind, or then smart watches, because these are related products. However, if you're exporting something like a pineapple as a product is extremely different from a iPhone or an iWatch. So these two products, for a country to have a transition from exporting agrarian goods to exporting these perhaps these white goods, these industrial goods, will be extremely difficult. But if you already have similar products in your export basket, then it will be easier. And having similar products in your export basket depends on the fact that what kind of economic architecture that you have. What is the kind of economic resources that you have? What is the kind of labor that you have? the human capital, the infrastructure. So all of that is also needs to be taken into consideration to find out that what kind of new products that you can get into. This is just a I mean, kind of an highlight into what we are going to study. Then moving into, see, I was talking about related products. This is the concept of related products, that structural transformation in the product space shows that you have a comparative advantage, and that comparative advantage will change with time. So comparative advantage as a theory, or a comparative advantage as a concept is not very static. Comparative advantage for a country also evolves with time. So the evolution tends to go strongly towards closely related products than products which are not closely related. As the example that I gave you, and in a country which is already into manufacturing of certain kind of electrical products can go into all kinds of electrical products, but an agrarian economy, simply an agrarian economy, cannot easily have a transition into these kinds of products. So this is what it's going to talk about. And the example is also here, that for a resource rich country like Iraq is perhaps completely dependent on its oil exports. So it's a natural resource. So a country which is highly dependent on its natural resource, it will find extremely difficult for a transition into any kind of high-tech manufacturing. Whereas country like Philippines, which is already diversified into several manufacturing technology, will find it easier. So we will see that where India's potential is. Where does India lie? Does India have the architecture in its place to produce those kinds of products which are required by the GVCs, and which are part of GVCs, and which will perhaps lead to its structural transformation? Then we are going to talk about network products. As I've told you, these are just the summary of the entire paper. That while in services we have diversified a lot in terms of our services, uh, as compared to higher incomes, our share of manufacturing exports, we have not been able to diversify much. So diversifying much in terms of the kind of sophistication, in time, kind of the quality of products, we will eventually see, this is the summary, we will eventually see that we are doing well in our services exports. We are actually exporting what are called as modern services. Modern services, you can perhaps think about something like banking, finance, now even into AI. So these are services that we are exporting, which are modern services, so to say. Whereas in terms of manufacturing, our manufacturing is still not been able. We have still not been able to catch up with our contemporaries, the emerging economies, which are at a very higher pedestal level when it comes to the quality of manufacturing products. The next paragraph talks about the potential of the Indian economy. Please go through that. And it also talks about that what India needs to do. We will talk about that India needs to. This is the policy perspective, that what India needs to do. We'll talk about that India needs to liberalize its trade policy. Uh, Liberalizing the trade policy will allow integration of technologies, integration of skills, integration of best practices. So agreements like the India ASEAN agreement, perhaps in terms of the RCEP, perhaps should have been signed. Then you should liberalize your FDI, you should focus on your MSMEs. All of these were also policy way forward by the previous reading. So whether you write the answer, the conclusion from this reading or the previous reading, does not matter, the conclusion is the same. The discussion on the evolution of India's export basket. Now the evolution we are going to talk about, when we're talk about the evolution, we are going to talk about the composition of exports, one thing, the composition of export in terms of goods, in terms of services. We are also going to talk about the direction of India's trade, and the diversification of India's trade, that how diversified or concentrated has India's trade been, or India's export basket been. So essentially this is where I want you to start focusing on, because this is the evolution. And in the evolution part, so the evolution of export basket. Now it's very easy to lose track of this reading because of the size of this, the voluminous size of this reading. That's why I'm simultaneously writing it down, so that at least you know the framework of the entire reading while you're going through the reading. So we are going to see the composition of exports, and while we are going to see the composition of exports, we are going to see the composition of both the goods and the service. Then the second thing that we are going to do is the direction of that. Where are we trading? And as you can probably imagine that our trade with the rich countries have perhaps come down, and our trade with the middle income groups and the lower income groups, which is also called as something called as the South-South cooperation. So the developed world perhaps lies in the temperate hemisphere. So that's why they're called as the global north. And when we talk about in political science, so in political science, the global north is a term that we use for the developed countries. Why do we use the global north? Because all of these countries are situated in the temperate regions. And if you talk about the south, the global south, all of the developing countries are a part of what is called as global south. And we will see that India's south trade, so that is India's trade with the developing world has perhaps increased at the cost of the north south trade, so to say. Then, and the third thing is the diversification. And here we will see the diversification, that how has India diversified in its export basket for both goods and services, for both goods, manufacturing goods and services, and both of them using an index called the Hoffenheim index. You don't need to get into what a Hoffenheim index is. This is something that we study in the masters. I did this in an international organization course in Delhi school. So all you need to understand is the basic of what Hoffenheim index says about industrial concentration and the implications that we have for our export basket. That is all that is needed. So let's start for our composition of exports. Now, when we see the composition of our exports, India has not followed the traditional textbook pattern. Now, what is the traditional textbook pattern? As you can imagine, the traditional textbook pattern is that moving from an agrarian export basket, which perhaps means that initially we will be exporting agrarian goods, and then with time we will get into manufacturing goods. Those manufacturing goods initially will be low-tech goods, low-value products, and with time we will move to medium technology and then to high-tech goods. Then we move on to service and then to modern services. So if you see the transition happens from agrarian products, then moving on to industrial or manufacturing products. Within the manufacturing products, initially we move from low value, low technological imbibement to medium, then to high tech. So essentially low tech, low value would be something like textiles, ready-made garments, the labor intensive commodities, low skill labor intensive commodities. Then medium technology will be something like electronics, toys, electrical. Then you have high tech. High tech will perhaps get into complex technologies, something like space materials, something like defense products, something like perhaps nuclear technology, nuclear power plants. So this is how manufacturing products, the evolution of manufacturing products takes place. And then moving into service goods, service products. And service products also has a bifurcation: basic services, and then moving on to modern service. What we see in case of India is that we see a dichotomy. the kind of dichotomy the reading mentions is the fact that India actually skipped. So a traditional non-rich country follows this kind of phase, while in India the share of modern services actually started increasing. So the dichotomy is that while India is lagging in the manufacturing and exporting very low tech, low value exports, it is actually doing extremely well when it comes to modern services. So the dichotomy that we are going to talk about is that while this India is doing this, India is also doing this. So that is the kind of dichotomy. While the economic structure is perhaps more focused towards the agrarian and the low skill manufacturing, India is also a champion of exporting modern services. Now, in our classes, we have often discussed the reason that why is it so. There is a host of reasons for that. One is the colonial factors. Then you have a huge English-speaking population. All of these modern services are perhaps built on the platform of English. Then we have a large population base. In that large population base, we have a huge base of engineers, we have a huge base of medical service providers, telecom service providers. All of them are very versatile in the language of English. So because of all these factors, we have a huge workforce of modern services as well. Then moving moving to this, we can see that the share of service exports actually has grown from 28% in 2000 to 32% in the total exports. So in the total exports, India's share in India's total exports, India's share of service exports is more than 30%, which actually mimics that of a developed country. So if you see this share, the share of service exports over total exports of India is more than 30%, which is actually mimicking the economic structure of a developed country. So while the share of manufacturing goods actually, the share of manufacturing products as a percentage of merchandise, as a share of merchandise exports is actually going down. So that is one of the major kind of crisis in the structural transformation phase that we are facing, and that is perhaps why you have the entire focus, the entire focus on Make in India, and this government has been doing has been taking extremely good steps to promote Make in India through structural reforms like GST, through improving ease of doing business, through also improving the FDI policies, opening up the economy. So a lot has been, or the labor reforms that we were talking about the other day. So there are a lot of structural reforms that the government is doing so that to enable India to become a manufacturing hub. This is what it talks about, and as I've told you that India directly skipped to the specialization in skill intensive industries or services, which it has this comparative advantage right now. The evolution of goods exports. Now, if you see, as I was telling you, that in 2013, manufacturing exports actually accounted for 90% of total exports of China. And whereas if you see India's case increased from in 1980. So the other figure was not from 1980. So the share of manufacturing in total merchandise exports, we are talking about as a percentage of total merchandise exports. So remember, the base is a little different. So merchandise exports, if you can remember, that everything which is visible is merchandise export. So of your visible exports, the manufacturing exports has only increased from 40% to 57% from 1980 to 2013. And that essentially means that an overwhelming share, around 40% of your merchandise exports, is still agrarian products. So your even your visible commodities, I mean, for an economy which is looking for structural transformation, you cannot have primary goods, primary products as taking a huge chunk of your merchandise exports. So which essentially shows that we have perhaps not been able to do that structural transformation which was supposed to happen in the industrial sector. Moving forward, even in terms of the technological content, so if we see the technological content, the although India's technological content has also increased, it's not that technological content has not increased. However, with time we see that as an economy evolves, the share of high tech and medium tech manufacturing as a part of exports globally starts increasing, as it has increased for China. Now even in India, we see that there is a clear shift in the manufacturing from traditional items like textiles, gems, leather products to high-tech items such as engineering goods. As I've told you that India has been exporting automobiles, some kind of engineering products as well. However, if we compare India to the other emerging economies, India still has a huge share of low-tech exports in its export basket. So India falls short when you compare India to its contemporary, which is the emerging market. See, perhaps some of the boxes that are being discussed are not very visible here. So what I will do is I will search for the original paper, the original IMF paper, and I'll upload that for you. The evolution of service exports. So as I've told you that while in manufacturing we were lagging behind because of the fact that we are still exporting uh, more of low technological exports, when we talk about service exports, um, perhaps our performance is much better, and as a share, as I've told you, that 30% of our total exports is from the service sector, which actually mimics something of a kind of an advanced economy. And that service exports is based on the revolution that has happened in terms of the information technology and information technology enabled service. So IT and ITES has changed the kind of basic ground realities, and it has tectonically shifted the exports, the India service exports, to another level. So if we see that this technological revolution is based on technology, it's based on transportability, it's based on tradability. So all of that has led to the development of what is called as modern service sector in India. And in that modern service sector, 70% is coming from the computers, coming from the export of computer services. So this is how, as I was telling you, computer services is perhaps 70% of your overall service exports. However, here too, India has a huge potential, as we will see that while there are certain services in which we specialize, certain modern services that we specialize in, there are other services which perhaps we have still not specialized in. We'll talk about R&D, we'll talk about service exchange, we'll talk about franchising. So there are other services that we have not ventured out into, which perhaps in which lies India's potential. So we'll talk about that in the later part of this paper. So our discussion, as I was telling you, our discussion is on the composition of exports. So our composition of exports part is done. Now we are going to talk about the direction of trade in India. If you talk about the direction of trade, uh, I've again mentioned you in the previous class that we are perhaps shifting towards emerging and developing economies at the expense of advanced economies. So as you can see in this diagram, you can see the share of advanced economies decreasing and the share of EMEs and low income countries increasing. One of the statistic is the share of US and EU decreased to 29% from 45% in a span of 13 years. Whereas the South, there is a clear trend of South-South trade. I've told you what South-South trade is. South-South trade is basically a euphemism for trade between developing countries, or India's trade with developing and the low income group countries. The next point is about diversification. So our third, I've already talked about this, that India is in the South-South trade, and the South-South trade is perhaps at expense of US and EU. Then we talk about diversification. Now, diversification, as all economies we see, with structural transformation, economies become less specialized into a particular commodity and it is more diversified. Every economy starts diversifying more. So essentially it becomes kind of a U-shaped curve. Why is it a U-shaped curve? So initially, if we see the concentration starts decreasing initially. An economy starts diversifying less, and it starts concentrating more on particular commodities. So suppose a country like China, it started concentrating only on manufacturing products. It stopped exporting not stopped, the share of manufactured products, certain kind of manufactured products started increasing, and then it started diversifying into other products, services, and all other products. With time, it started export. So that is the kind of U-shaped curve that we expect for a country, and that U-shaped curve is on the basis of a Herfindahl index. So Herfindahl index talks about the concentration. It talks about industrial concentration in the sense that suppose, let's take the market of telecom. The telecom market is not concentrated at all, because in telecom market actually you have only two players. You have Jio and you have Airtel, and you have a laggard third player, which is the Vodafone Idea conglomerate. So you have essentially three players, but two players are the major market. Whereas if you see, say, a market like a shirt market, in a shirt market you have thousands of players with no particular company coming out to be as a leader. So the more the concentration, the Herfindahl index actually shows that how much industrial power is being concentrated, and industrial power being concentrated is actually being shown in terms here of both at an aggregate level, in terms of the entire economy, and also in terms of sectoral share. So as you can imagine, that when you start specializing in a particular commodity, say a particular nation starts making only phones. So once you start making phones, specializing in phones, so there will be 10 players, 20 players, 30 players, 40 players which will be producing only phones. So the concentration in that particular sector goes down. And when you have diversification, of products, then the concentration in each particular kind of subset of an economy will be much less. So we expect this kind of a U curve with structural transformation. Let's see India's case. Now, India also has diversified its merchandise exports over the last three decades. Similarly, the services have also diversified over the last three decades. However, if we see, these service exports are perhaps more diversified as compared to India's manufacturing exports. So if we compare India's service exports versus manufacturing exports are perhaps less diversified when we compare ourselves to the other emerging economies, and when we also compare it to our service exports. Our service exports are perhaps more. Next part of the reading is extremely important, because this part of the reading is perhaps the most technical part. So this part of the reading talks about transformation of India's exports, and that transformation will be on the basis of three parameters. One will be quality. Has quality improved of India's exports and services? Has sophistication improved of India's exports in goods and services, and has complexity improved? So what we are going to talk about is the transformation of the export basket. Now this transformation is going to be based on three parameters. One will be based on the complexity, the other will be first will be based on quality, and essentially we are going to talk about both goods and services. So has quality increased? We will explain how quality is, what is quality and how do we define the quality. Then we also talk about the fact that has the sophistication increased. We will define what sophistication is, and then we will also go to define what complexity. These are the three jargons that we will analyze, and through these three jargons we will see that how the export basket has been performing in India over time. And on the basis of these three jargons, we will also be able to analyze later on this reading that where does the potential lie. So let's start our discussion. As you can probably imagine, that India's goods exports are the complexity, the sophistication, the quality. If you see in all these three parameters, India's goods exports, you will find out that they are not performing as well as you compare it to India's contemporaries, which is the emerging economies. While when we talk about the service exports, India is doing perhaps well, as well, and even better than the peer emerging economies. That is the conclusion. See, that is the concluding part. But let's see how does it talk about each of these components. So now the evolution of India's exports also depends. So when we talk about the evolution of exports, we are also going to talk about the quality management and the quality assurance. Has the quality of product increased or not? See, the quality of product in case of natural products is perhaps going to be very limited. So if you export, say, if you're a economy which exports agrarian goods, I was taking the example of a pineapple. So if you're initially exporting pineapple, the best that you can do is perhaps export a pineapple puree, a pineapple jam. But now compare that you are taking it to our previous example that you were making phones. So the quality of phones will keep on increasing. Initially you were only making the touchpad or the keypad kind of phones, then you had the stylus phones, then you improved to the touchscreen phones, then you had newer technology in touchscreen, then you had a fingerprint lock, then you had a facial recognition lock. So the quality in terms of manufacturing products, so you have to see in manufacturing products there is a huge scope of quality enhancement, whereas in agrarian product this is limited. So the potential for quality upgradation, the length of a product quality, which varies with quality. Natural resources tends to have lower potential as compared to the products which are manufacturing in nature. Now if we see, India actually exports some amount of good quality products, which are diamonds, nuclear reactors, tin alloys. But if we compare it to all our contemporaries, our contemporaries are exporting much higher level of, or a wider width of these products as compared to India. So if you see, India is only doing well in terms of a few commodities. So if you can see, India is doing well in nuclear commodities, in diamonds, in perhaps a couple of more items, whereas in all other commodities India is actually not doing well. So it's only a few products that we are actually good at in terms of quality. So there lies a huge potential for India, that India can actually venture out into manufacturing goods, and then after you start manufacturing goods, then you can every year or with time you can improve the quality. That was the quality aspect. Then we have sophistication. Now, one of the concepts that came into economic theory was that rapid economic growth does not only depend on the amount of exports, it also depends on the technological content and the embedded sophistication of the exports. That also matters. So growth matters not only the amount of exports, but the technological content and the embedded sophistication of that. Now, how do you analyze this? Now, for that you need to go through two different concepts. Now, one of the concepts is called product potential income, product income, which is given by which is the concept of income potential. Income potential is being discussed through a kind of a scale which is given by PRODY. So productivity of a particular product, that you can imagine, this is how this is defined. And there's another index which we're going to consider, which is EXPY, the exporting income. So what are these two concepts? Now let's define these two terms. Now, the productivity or the income potential of a given product is basically you are ranking all the products and services on the basis of the income level of the countries that export them. So you have goods and services. Now, what you do is that what are the goods which are being exported by rich countries, middle income countries, and poor countries or low income countries. So these products are being ranked by the exporting nations. So what are the products which are being exported by rich countries, the middle countries, and low income countries? So all of these goods and services are ranked on the kind of countries which are exporting them. So that gives you the kind of ranking which talks about the kind of income potential that a particular commodity has. Now, because a commodity is being exported by a rich country, that means the embodiment of technology, or in terms of the income generating capacity, will be much more as compared to the export which a low income group or export of a good which a low income group country is doing. So on one side we have this productivity of Y index, then productivity income index. Then on the other hand, what we do is we use the export baskets associated of each particular. So what we do is, now we go ahead, and what we do is that we start to see individual items in the export basket of each country, and we can think about the productivity associated with the export basket. So essentially what we are doing is we are ranking now countries. So this was a ranking of goods and services. The export income is basically the ranking of countries on the basis of their export basket. So there are two kinds of things that we are doing. So if you see the export income index, the export basket of a rich country will be very different from the export basket of a poor country. So you can see that a rich country will have a higher technology, a higher sophisticated or higher complex goods as compared to a poor nation's exports. So the export basket of a country is also kind of giving a reflection into the kind of sophistication it has. So as a broad rule of thumb, the measure captures that any given country's export basket contains primarily of products that are typically exported by high income countries or by low income group countries. So if a country, so if you can probably imagine that a country should actually think of those kinds of commodities where the prod y should be more than export y. Now I'm skipping the gun, and this is a concept that I will discuss later as well. But see, what essentially are we going to talk about? So when we talk about sophistication, we have two indexes. Our first index is the productivity income index, and the second is, these are the two indexes that we are going to discuss. Now, this is basically a ranking of goods and services according to nations: rich, middle, and low income. Whereas this is actually the export basket of rich. Now, what a country needs to do is to actually see that what needs to be done is that products where, see, all of them are going to talk about products. So products, those products where the productivity of that particular, or the income potential. So this also talks about the income potential, because if it's a commodity which is being produced by a rich country, that means of course it has a huge income potential, because that is perhaps the basis on which the country became rich. So this shows the income potential. If this is for a particular commodity is more than the export index y, this shows that there is a potential to produce this commodity, because your particular export basket product is not actually that of a rich economy. So for all these products, this ratio, if this ratio is the prod y is more than this, or you can say that if prod y upon is greater than 1, this shows that all of these products are those products which a country can go into, because for all producing all these products, the income for the economy will increase, because these are products which are actually being produced by rich countries, and these are not being produced by your country, because the kind of quality, the sophistication that you have in your export basket is not the same as it is there in for that product in rich countries. So this is the technical aspect of defining sophistication. Let's read it through, because this is a very important concept. Now, the related concepts of productivity or income potential of a given product. So this talks about the potential that a particular commodity can have. Remember, this is a commodity wise. When we talk about prod y, this is a commodity wise index. Now, so the productivity or income potential of a given product is basically the ranking of products and services based on the income levels of countries that export them. So take the case of a very latest technological embodied defense material. Take the case of the 5th generation fighter jet. So 5th generation fighter jet will be exported by a country like US, a country like Russia, and moreover a country which is actually manufacturing it, China. So if you see that all of these products, or say or a service like AI on cloud, artificial intelligence on cloud, so that is a service which is being provided, which is actually being exported by rich countries. So ranking products and services based on the income level of the country that exports them. Products exported by rich countries are ranked higher on the are higher. Then productivity associated with individual items is then used to construct the EXPY index, which can be thought of representing the productivity or the income level associated with the country's export basket. So you are actually comparing, essentially you are comparing the income potential that you can have versus the existing export basket situation. So if your income potential of that of any particular commodity is more than that of the existing export basket potential, existing export basket productivity, then of course you should go for the production of that commodity. Now we will see that just because the potential is there, so as I was telling you that yes, of course, making a fifth generation fighter aircraft has a huge potential for any country. It has a huge potential for India. But does India have any know-how of producing of a fighter jet of fifth generation? So as you can see that it's you can probably relate to the example that recently India finally said okay to its LCA, low cost area low cost craft carrier, which is being incorporated in the Navy, Tejas. So it has been indigenously built. So it's not as if that we are not having the technology to produce a fighter jet. It's just now to move from a fourth generation or a 3.5 fourth generation fighter aircraft to a fifth generation aircraft, as compared to say that we are only producing agrarian goods. So agrarian goods are completely unrelated to a fighter aircraft. The transition from agrarian goods to a fighter aircraft will be much difficult as compared to we are already produced indigenous aircraft, fighter aircraft. Now we need to move towards a better quality aircraft, a aircraft which has a better technology in it. So that kind of potential is possible. So this is the kind of analysis that we are going to see in our readings, in the further analysis. So if we see India's service exports, India's service exports are highly sophisticated, and sophistication can be understood that India's export basket will have the goods which are also there in the export basket of rich countries. So India's service exports will be IT, will be banking exports, will be legal service exports, medical exports, and if you see these service exports of US, it will be similar. So thereby we are actually, our existing products in the export basket actually matches that of rich countries. So the difference between, so if you see the difference between the PRODY minus the EXPY will not be much when it comes to service exports, especially modern service exports. Whereas this difference will be huge when we talk about manufacturing exports. I hope with these examples this thing is much clearer, because and in this part the reading gets extremely technical. Although all you need to remember is the concept of PRODY and EXPY. So wherever this difference is large, that shows higher potential. Higher potential means that you need to go into that particular product, given that you already have a similar related kind of product being already produced in the economy, which we will identify through the network analysis. We'll get into that network analysis, that how close products are we producing. So India's service exports are highly sophisticated, and India's service exports are modern services, and at times which is perhaps more sophisticated than the average higher income group countries. So in fact, if you see the PRODY list, perhaps India lies at the very top, because India world sees India's exports as the very service exports as the very best. However, if we see and we see that we have moved away from traditional activities to modern activities, which is business services and computer services. Whereas if we see the merchandise goods, if we see the manufacturing goods, our sophistication remains very low. As we can see that the sophistication, if we talk about the sophistication of manufactured goods, China, excuse me, you will find US, you will find Germany, all of these countries, these manufacturing countries, that you can think of. You can think of Germany, you can think of Japan, you can think of Korea, you can think of China. All of these are manufacturing hubs. All of these, if we compare India's EPXY of a particular commodity and we compare it to PRODY, you will find a huge gap. So these are commodities which we can, in which we have actual potential. So moving on. So this is how we have defined India's transition over time in terms of sophistication. So all we have done is we have told that India's sophistication in terms of services has been there on the basis of these two indexes, comparing the two indexes. And while in terms of manufacturing, we are perhaps not there. So there lies a huge gap. Then we have a concept of complexity of exports. Now you have something called as a economic complexity index. So now we have another jargon for this. As we have discussed, for this we are going to compare EPXY versus PRODY. For this we are going to have the economic complexity index. Now, what is the economic complexity index? So economic complexity index basically talks about the productive knowledge and the capability of a country to produce diverse set of products. So a country like China will be able to produce a very diverse set of products because of the kind of productive knowledge that it has. So what essentially we are talking about is that you must have studied this in terms of the endogenous growth theories as well. So the capabilities, the human capabilities, the human knowledge that we built on through investment in innovations. So what happens is that for each particular economy, you have an embedded amount of technology, embedded amount of human capital that is there in that particular society. So the sum of a country's productive knowledge, and that is also being reflected in its exports, sum of productive knowledge and capability just a second, and capability will decide that how much diverse products you can make. The more productive and the more capable your country is, you can make diverse products. But at the same point of time, it also talks about a new concept, which is ubiquity, which essentially translates into that how many other countries are making these products. So if there is a product which is actually novel, which is actually not being replicated elsewhere, you are perhaps the only few players which is actually making that particular kind of product. For example, India makes nuclear reactors. So there will only be a handful of countries which can actually make nuclear reactors. Not only nuclear reactors, India can actually make a different kind of nuclear reactors. There are heavy water nuclear reactors, there are fast breeder reactors. Then you have these advanced heavy water nuclear reactors. Then you have nuclear reactors which will perhaps be run on thorium. So we have a diversity, as well as the fact that only a few countries can actually produce this. So economic complexity, the complexity of a particular product depends on the diversification of the production, that how many products that you can make, and how many of them are actually unique products. And if we see countries like Japan and Germany, you will see that they have huge diversified products. At the same point of time, they produce products which are unlikely to be copied or unlikely to be made by any other country. So their rank on the ECI index will be much higher than other countries. As you can see, you will have advanced economies, you have China, Russia, and way back it lies India. So this is what we are going. This is the concept of economic complexity index, and if we see that India lies way behind all these other emerging economies when we talk about the complexity of goods. And the kind of complexity that we have in our service exports is that we have not diversified our service exports, whereas at the same point of time we provide certain exclusive service exports. So all you need to remember, so this is the four quadrants that the entire diagram is being divided into. Now all you need to remember here is that India, that India's service exports are such. Remember, there are two concepts when we talk about complexity. One is diversity. So India's service exports are not diversified. We are not producing many modern services, but at the same point of time, the kind of services that we are actually exporting are unique. So we are producing exclusive services which are not diversified. That is the economic complexity of India's service exports. This is what this entire diagram is reflecting. Then moving forward, the next section talks about the implication of evolution for India's exports. That what needs to be done in terms of India's exports, which all commodities can India go into, what is the policy perspective, and on what basis can we say that these are the products that India needs to go into. So the actually this is actually the final part. After that comes the way forward and the conclusion. So implications for India's, this is what we are going to talk about. And for this we are going to take two technical jargons. One is the revealed comparative advantage. One, we are going to talk about the revealed comparative advantage. Now you've already studied the concept of comparative advantage. This is a modified concept. I'll explain you what this concept is. And the other thing that we are going to do is the product space analysis, product and network space. We will see that what are these two concepts, right? Now moving forward, let's see what it says. It says that product space analysis and the revealed comparative advantage of India's exports suggest that India is in a very good position to diversify into income enhancing products. Now, as you might have guessed, what are these income enhancing products? Those products for which the PRODY is more than, or the PRODY by EXPY is greater than 1. We'll see a diagram. In that diagram, we will have log PRODY minus log EPXY. So wherever this is greater than 1, that shows that we have a huge income potential in those particular commodities. Then, and increasing the share on what India needs to do is increasing the share of high income marginal and disappearing exports. We'll see that what are marginal and disappearing exports, and diversifying into core product space. We'll also see what this core product space is. Now the implication is that the kind of products that you will specialize into will have future consequences. It's something to what you study in economics, what is called as path dependency. The action that you take today will depend on the kind of economic path you will have. It is something like if you remember, in development economics and in macroeconomics, you have different savings rate, and all of these different savings rate will give you different different optimal rates, golden rate of accumulation. But you have to find that best saving rate which will give you the most optimal solution. So similarly, the kind of product that you choose to diversify in and the kind of product that you choose to specialize in will also matter, because that eventually will lead to the kind of growth that your economy will have then. And it not only depends on the kind of products, it also depends on the kind of same set of products or the new products that you are producing. So not only you have to produce products, you also need to have increase the quality of the products, you have to introduce new products. But the ability to produce new products will depend on the existing products that you have, similar products that you have. You can easily write down the example here of that. Can India produce fifth generation fighter aircraft? Fifth generation fighter aircraft can be produced by India because of the fact that India produces LCA Tejas. So because it's a related product, India already has experience and expertise in producing these products. India can perhaps do that. So that kind of complexity can be reached if you have something similar already being produced. So you already know how to make an engine, you already know that what goes into the aeronautics part of making an aeroplane. So all of that, if you need, and if you can produce these two, then perhaps you can also produce domestic airliners. So right now we are dependent on companies like Airbus. If you have heard of the company Airbus, so you must have seen that Airbus 787 or A380, which is the largest airplane, domestic airplane in the world. So if you can make these kinds of planes, why can't you make other kinds of planes? To give you another example, that initially India started with the space mission that we had. If you see the space mission, the PSLV, Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, actually these launch vehicles were actually being modified, and then the integrated missile program that India had, which was headed by Dr. Abdul Kalam, that was a modification of PSLV actually. So with that, the related product was the Agni missiles, the Prithvi missiles, and then you have different versions of Agni and Prithvi. Similarly, we have BrahMos as a missile. Then we had the naval version of BrahMos. We had the underwater version of BrahMos. Now we have the aircraft version of BrahMos. So essentially, you are talking about a similar product being produced and then modifying it to different uses. So whether in your examination you write this example or this example, I leave it up to you. But now you can perhaps understand the ability to produce new products depends on already existing products, path dependency. Now let's talk about the revealed comparative advantage.
Excuse me, sir. So I'm really
Yes.
sorry to interrupt, but can we please just like stop for today? We've had really like studied a lot.
Okay. So what we will do is, I know even I'm getting tired. So what I'll do is I'll pause this meeting for today, and we can continue our analysis. Perhaps tomorrow we'll need approximately half an hour, 45 minutes to complete this entire reading. I'll make you revise the entire reading first, the first half, and then we can do the second half again. So thank you for interrupting me in between. So I'm signing off, and I'll be sending you the PDF and the attendance along with the YouTube video for this lecture. Okay, thank you.